I'll move the ENSO part to a later podcast because I have more material that's more specifically focused on ENSO and its variability through the Holocene. When we say ENSO variability, ENSO happens every 2 to 7 years, but when you look at a chunk of time like the Holocene, its duration, frequency, and intensity is not constant. There could be decades where there is low El Nino activity and decades where there is more El Nino activity and so on. So that's what we call ENSO variability, which we'll come back to later, which is also a very critical topic, as I said, for how El Nino is responding to the warming already, or how it will respond as the warming continues. Okay, so this kind of figures are always cute because somebody sits down and thinks about all the potential links and feedbacks that happen between nature, culture, and human beings. We kind of looked at a pattern like this before, but this is now in the context of Holocene. So you can start anywhere since it's a complicated diagram. So let's just start here. A continuity and prosperity of material culture, greater length of sedentism, so communities become settled and they are not hunting gathering anymore. They settle down, fertility goes up, population goes up, and so on. But also intensified and diversified economic activities can evolve, increasing population and social complexity. So people begin to get stratified into their abilities, their responsibilities, their remunerations, and so on. That can lead to emergence of settlement clusters and hierarchies, and local centers for economic, tribal safety, and political centers, which of course what we would call emergence of civilization. But this continuity and sedentism also can lead to migration and expansion, either adventurism with militarization because you have continuous prosperity and you want to see if you can take over more regions, or you have enough money to travel outside, like now it happens in modern times, when if you have enough money and you are not comfortable with the comfort level of a particular country, you may want to move to a more better lifestyle, either from city center to a mountain or a beach, or the other way, and so on and so forth, but within the country or across the country or within regions in these Holocene periods, which can lead to tribal conflicts and cultural contacts, which can also feed back to emergence of settlements and clusters, and also can affect improvements in adjustment to the local conditions, food production systems, economic activities, and so on, which can lead to further development of material culture and again affect migration and expansion. So you can see here a kind of a positive feedback between migration, expansion, tribal conflicts, and cultural contacts. So this is how things have evolved over time, so it is a kind of good typology. But on the other direction, you also have a decline or discontinuity of material culture and occupation that might come in and affect migration, expansion, and tribal conflicts and settlements and clusters in another way, coming from here where we have adjustment, improved techniques on subsistence strategies, which can go into this loop we have looked at with increased prosperity that will be long lasting, or it is coming from a driver which is based on environmental change leading to human activities and impacts on the environment. So there is a feedback there, but these human activities will also can lead to increased population, which in turn can affect activities and environmental changes, of course, and surely will affect availability of land and other resources, which are already playing out, especially since the Industrial Revolution. As lifespan has gone up, Green Revolution and other things have massively led to massive growth of super exponential rates of population, and now fertility rates have been dropping for a few decades, and maybe population itself is beginning to even out, even in a place like China, because of women's education and so on. But that can then feed back to adjustments and improvements in techniques on subsistence strategies, leading to prosperity changes, migration, expansion, and so on. But this can also result in failure of adjustment and depletion of natural resources, which can again drive migration and expansion, requiring improved adjustments and further development of material culture. Or it can go and feed into a decline and discontinuity of material culture and occupation. Idea is that environmental determinism is not so obvious when you have such complicated feedbacks possible between humans, nature, fertility rates, establishment of settlement clusters, migrations, militarizations, conflicts, cultural contacts, and so on. So this tells you the complications, and we can understand those by looking at various quotes in the book from various sources. So I will go through a few of those along the way, because it also shows us how geographers and anthropologists and social scientists tend to take the evidence and develop narratives that are discursive. So the problem itself may be in a narrative form of interpreting data, and the solution is also in a narrative form, as opposed to natural sciences where quantitative analysis of data, statistics, and modeling often are involved, whereas here more of mental modeling is involved to explain evidences. So this is a quote this is from Nature, sorry. In an essay on a late Holocene eruption of Popocatépetl in central Mexico, Plunkett and Urunuela write, I'm obviously massacring the pronunciations here, but you can go and look it up. Volcanic disasters often have been invoked as prime movers in the culture history of ancient civilizations. They have been used to explain large-scale migrations, the destruction of cities, famine, and demographic collapse. In this paper, we explore the geological, archaeological, and sociological records in order to provide insights into the complex nature of human responses to a major volcanic event of Popocatépetl in central Mexico that took place 2,000 years ago. We suggest that the population implosion experienced by two emerging highland cities in the first century AD, Teotihuacan in the basin of Mexico and Cholula in the Puebla Valley, was due to both the immediate consequences of the volcanic event and the disaster-driven acceleration of social processes already underway when the catastrophe struck. So before the catastrophe, there was an evolution of culture, society, stratification, hierarchies, livelihoods, economic activities, and so on. And the response of this evolving culture to this massive perturbation was also potentially responsible for the acceleration of social processes that were already underway. We conclude that a better understanding of the relationship between human populations and volcanic hazards and disasters permits a more realistic assessment of the social and cultural significance of eruptive phenomena in the prehistoric period. So in this context, it's just an environmental change that percolated through all these boxes and produced a certain result. And the idea here is that those are complicated and not easily understood, and it's not pure environmental determinism, but the acceleration of social processes by the environmental perturbation can determine the ultimate outcome, especially in terms of demographic changes, avoiding the word collapse again. Another example from the book: as adoption of agriculture expanded, a further feature of the evolution of agriculture is noticed by Dow et al. Sorry, I screwed up many of these texts by not having space and so on. Even if foragers have no problem conserving wild resources, agricultural societies might tend to destroy the nearby habitat as a byproduct of farming activities. So farming in general involves changing water resource structures, hydrologic structures, vegetation, forests, and so on. This could lock in farming because over time the potential returns from foraging would drop. So if you're depending on a nearby forest for various sources of fruits and tubers and other things, by clearing it out you have lost it, and now you are locked into the agricultural practice. It could also give neighboring foragers more reason to adopt agriculture, so kind of a visual theft idea that we discussed in Mark Pagel's book. This factor, coupled with the technical advantages of domesticated crops and the military advantages of large populations, as hypothesized by Jared Diamond, may help explain the diffusion of agriculture out of its pristine centers. So now we are back to agriculture, saying environment, social, cultural practices, and agricultural practices as opposed to foraging practices begin to affect the evolution of agriculture itself and its diffusion out of its original independent discovery sites. So we saw some of these in each continent in terms of where independently agriculture, domestication of plants and animals may have evolved and how it could have diffused to other places. Okay, so this gives you a sense of how complicated the cultural dynamics have been through the Holocene, considering climate perturbations as one of the drivers. May not always be a proximal driver, but may be an ultimate driver in terms of driving cascades through human responses, changes in societal structure, economic activities, agricultural activities, diffusion of agriculture, and so on, without even considering agricultural feedbacks to climate. But then the question is whether agricultural diffusion and innovation come before society got complex, stratified, and hierarchical, or was the societal structure change the cultural dynamics responsible for evolution of agriculture and diffusion of agriculture? Those questions don't necessarily get answered, but we can keep on looking at these examples and narratives and case studies to understand just how complex it is. And all these are relevant because even now in this modern climate we are interacting in similar ways, with drought in one place affecting now global supply chains, like COVID affecting supply chains, a typhoon in Philippines affecting supply chain of coconut products throughout the planet and affecting economies significantly in some places, and so on. So there is always this interaction between climate perturbations, which can be local or global in terms of volcanic eruptions, for example, but with local patterns. Cooling and droughts can be very local even with a volcanic eruption. So how these local climate perturbations cascade through the system and affect cultural dynamics in the Holocene context. Now we are looking mostly as a globally connected society, whereas through the Holocene, before Industrial Revolution, we have to look at it as perturbations that were local in climate. Cultural responses and dynamics were maybe local, but migration and expansion kept happening as well. Okay.